I've lived in many apartments in my life. The majority of them were in the US. But I also lived in an apartment in Germany since I moved here almost 5 years ago. In this time, I've noticed a lot of differences between average apartments in the US and Germany. And believe me, there are many differences, probably a lot more than you can imagine. In this video, we're going to talk about what makes apartments here unique. But first, for those of you who are interested in moving to Germany, let's start with how to find an apartment here. Los geht's. When I was planning my move to Germany almost 5 years ago, I realized that finding an apartment remotely from the US was not going to be easy. This is because there are some special requirements to getting an apartment here that make it difficult to do from a distance. However, I found it was possible to arrange a temporary furnished apartment remotely, so this is what I did. The service I use is called Wonderflats, and it really helped me in the transition. While temporary apartments definitely cost more, they can really help you get your foot in the door and give you time to gather what's needed to secure a more permanent place. And though there are several steps in this process, here's a quick breakdown of how it worked for me. Once I had my temporary apartment, I was able to get my Anmeldung, meaning I registered my address with the local government. Then, after living here a while, I got my Schufa, which is like a credit report. And with these in hand, I was finally ready to start looking for a long-term apartment. One of the top ways to find an apartment in Germany is to use ImmoScout24. To get an apartment, you'll need to create an account on their website and provide all of the information requested. You might also want to consider paying for a premium account if you can afford it. The premium accounts are currently about 20 euros per month for 6 months, and I think it's totally worth it. It can speed up the search process, and landlords seem to look at you much more favorably. The other thing that I did was to create a one-page introduction of myself to submit to potential landlords. This introduction included some details about myself and what type of tenant I would be. And while it isn't required, I think it can really help your chances in a competitive rental market. Of course, even if you do this, finding an apartment in Germany can still be very challenging. And right now, there's a big housing shortage. In large and desirable cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich, it can be challenging to find something quickly. So, beyond doing what I already mentioned, I also think it's very important to be as patient and as flexible as possible in your apartment search. Of course, you can still keep a list of your absolute must-haves, but it's probably a good idea to allow some flexibility in location and apartment features. The hardest apartments to get in Berlin, for example, tend to be in the younger, hipper parts of town like Prenzlauer Berg, Friedrichshain, Kreuzberg, or Neukölln. So it helps to be open to other neighborhoods and even to consider paying a bit more if you can. When you finally do get a place, be prepared to pay 2 months deposit in addition to the first month's rent before moving in. Oh, there's also a chance that you may need to buy a new kitchen, which can be quite expensive. More on this soon. Okay, let's get into the differences with apartments here, including some features you should consider during your apartment search. Speaking of kitchens, they are definitely one of the biggest differences between US and German apartments. First of all, they tend to be more compact, especially if you live in a small apartment. So they're typically going to have a smaller fridge, oven, and countertop. And yes, that oven probably won't be big enough to fit your giant Thanksgiving turkey. While you can get turkey here, it's challenging to find a whole one in the grocery store. Anyways, I would say Wiener Schnitzel makes an excellent substitute. Another thing you won't find in the kitchen here is a garbage disposal. I'm not even sure they're sold here. Finally, since recycling is such a big thing here, you'll probably have some kind of built-in recycling system like this one. These are commonly found under the counter in most apartments here. One last note on kitchens. As I said earlier, it's possible your apartment won't have a kitchen installed. The thing is, Germans sometimes take their kitchens with them when they move. In this case, you'll need to get one installed yourself. This can be a big investment. So, who knows, you may eventually want to take yours with you too. Fortunately, these days it seems more and more apartments come with kitchens. But just keep this in mind when choosing an apartment. And the differences don't end there. Bathrooms here also may have some unfamiliar features. Most importantly, you're going to need to look out for the dreaded shelf toilet. Even though these have mostly been phased out, you can still find them lurking in old buildings, primarily in Eastern Germany. I'll leave it up to you to imagine the main problem with these abominations of plumbing. But trust me, you do not want one of these. If you see one, I recommend running in the opposite direction. Okay, with that out of the way, some other differences with bathrooms concern their layout, the shower area, and the towel racks. In terms of layout, it's possible you could find an apartment that has the toilet separated from the rest of the bathroom. I personally like this, but I know some find it odd. Next, it's also possible that you will come across a bathroom that only has a tub and no fixed shower head. This setup will likely only be found in older buildings, so look out for that one. Finally, it's very common for bathrooms in Germany to have heated towel racks. These are really nice for those of you who want a warm towel right after a shower. And as a bonus, they also help prevent mold in the colder months, which we'll discuss more later. Okay, here's another thing that might seem strange to some Americans. When it comes to washing machines, you're likely to find them in places where you might not expect them. Sometimes they'll be in your kitchen, other times they might stand right in the middle of your bathroom, or you might not have one at all. So if you have to buy one, this could add significantly to your move-in costs. Another thing, standalone dryers are not common here, and you probably won't have a room for a separate washer and a dryer anyway. Instead, you can either get a washer-dryer combo or just a standalone washer. If you only get a washer, you'll be like many other Germans here who use indoor drying racks like this one. But don't forget, most apartments have quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. and also all day on Sundays and holidays. Technically, you aren't supposed to run the washing machine during these times. And now for something completely different, ventilation. Now you might not have spent much time thinking about ventilation before, but if you move to Germany, you will. As you probably know, most apartments in the US have fans for ventilation. In Germany, especially in older buildings or Altbaus, ventilation works differently. What you have to do instead is called Lüften. Lüften is all about airing out your apartment on a regular basis. The Germans have very specific guidelines for this depending on the time of the year. In fact, Lüften rules are written into lease agreements here. What this means is that your windows should be opened a couple times a day for around 10 minutes or so to air out your apartment. This keeps the humidity low so that it stays under 60% to avoid problems with mold. Now what's cool, pun intended, is that your apartment is going to have these special windows that make Lüften easy. I have to say it's a pleasure every day opening up my windows to bring in some nice fresh air. Another great thing is that the windows here are double glazed, so they do an excellent job of keeping out noise when closed. Also, you should know that windows here generally do not come with shades, blinds, or screens. You might find an apartment in a new building or on a ground floor that has automatic blinds already built in, but most apartments won't have any blinds included, so you have to get those installed yourself. Don't forget to check your lease agreement or ask your landlord if there are any special rules before getting anything installed. Germans can be very particular about details like this in ways that may be surprising to anyone coming from the US. So you might be wondering, with all of this Lüften going on, what happens with the heating and air conditioning? Well, most German apartments do not have central heating. Instead, they use radiators like this. And though it may take some getting used to, you won't have control over the heat year-round. You see, the way it works here, heat in the building only gets turned on in October and then it's turned off again in April. You also won't be able to set a specific temperature. Instead, the radiators have dials that go from 0 to 5. So at first, it might take some guesswork figuring out the temperature that's right for you. I recommend getting yourself a temperature gauge that also shows humidity, so you can keep track of these things. I found that setting the dial to around 2.5 in the winter gives me a temperature around 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Though, I think most Germans do tend to keep their places a bit cooler here in the winter. Moving on, another surprising difference to note is that most apartments in Germany do not have air conditioning.
Inconceivable! You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Now, I know this is likely going to be a major adjustment for many coming from the US. It certainly has been for me. But even though it can be difficult to deal with the heat for a couple weeks in the summer, I think living without air conditioning isn't so bad. Now, I'm much more in tune with the great outdoors, since my windows are open a lot in the summer and I'm not closed into an artificial environment. And Germany is farther north than most of the US, so it's generally cooler here in the summer. On hotter days, I just spend more time outdoors and use a fan when needed. I also think lighting deserves a brief mention here. Another little surprise for me when getting a German apartment was the lack of lighting. Don't get me wrong, Germans use lights and electricity just like the rest of us, but when you first move into an apartment here, it's likely you'll find nothing but dangling wires where overhead lights should be. That's right, many Germans also like to take their lights with them when they change apartments. So don't be surprised if you need to have lights installed after moving in. Last but not least, let's talk about apartment common areas. First, you should know that it's possible that the hallways and stairwells in your apartment building may be in need of an upgrade, especially if you live in an older building. It's funny, since I found that many apartments here are updated and modernized on the inside, but the common areas often haven't been upgraded in years. For example, you might find that carpets need to be replaced or that walls need painting. In some cases, renters are actually responsible for cleaning the common areas, but this varies by building. By the way, there's also a good chance that you won't have an elevator in your apartment building. So, if that's important to you, watch out for this one, unless you love climbing stairs. Some Germans do say that it's great for circulation after all. The last thing I want to mention is going to be a bit of a shocker, and that is the trash room, which is often found in the Keller, underneath the apartment building. We might consider this a basement or a cellar in the US. Okay, now buckle up. In older buildings, the trash room is usually located in a dark, dingy basement like something right out of a horror movie. You're going to have to venture down there whenever you need to get rid of trash or do recycling. Personally, I try to limit myself to only going down there once a week. But believe me, taking the trash out can be a new and exciting adventure every time. Okay, sorry to end with that. But as I've said before, not everything is better here in Germany, and I'll speak more about this in a future video. But for now, those are some of the biggest differences between apartments in the US and Germany. Hopefully, knowing these things in advance can help you adjust more easily to your new life here. Moving to a new country will always be a big adjustment, but it will be worth it. Even though many things are different here in Germany, I think you'll find that the overall quality of life is much better than in the US. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions. That's it for now. Tschüss, bis später!